14 kids vanished on a school trip in 2007. 18 years later, what they found changes everything. In the spring of 2007, the town of Mill Creek was alive with the sound of children's laughter. It was a small, peaceful place surrounded by green forests, winding rivers, and a chain of low mountains that the townspeople always called the Sleeping Giants. The local school, Mill Creek Middle, had been preparing for weeks for its big annual class trip. Every year, the older students were taken to explore the mountains. Teachers said the trip was meant to teach teamwork, survival basics, and to help children see the beauty of nature outside their classrooms. For the children, it was the most exciting event of the year. 14 students, all between the ages of 12 and 14, packed their bags with eager smiles. They stuffed in jackets, snacks, and small notebooks where they liked to write about the adventure. Their parents hugged them that morning, waving them off as the yellow school bus pulled away from the town square. Nobody could have guessed that those hugs might be the last time families would see their children again. The bus rattled along the winding road toward Pine Ridge Mountain, the chosen destination for that year's school trip. Teachers Mr. Reynolds and Miss Carter sat at the front, checking names against their list. A local guide, Mr. Dalton, was also there, a man who had grown up in those mountains and knew every turn, every stream, every trail by heart. The children trusted him completely. As the bus climbed higher, the view outside the windows was breathtaking. The green valleys rolled out endlessly, sunlight glinting off the river far below. The children pressed their faces against the glass, pointing and shouting to their friends. Excitement buzzed through the bus like electricity. They sang songs, shared candy, and laughed until their stomachs hurt. For them, it was a day of freedom, far away from homework, school rules, and the small worries of everyday life. By mid-morning, the group arrived at the trailhead. Mr. Dalton gathered the children around and gave a short talk about safety. "Stay with the group," he said firmly. "No wandering off on your own. The mountain is beautiful, but it can be tricky. We walk together, we return together." The children nodded, though their eyes still darted to the wide path leading into the tall pines. Their legs were ready to run, but they trusted the adults. The hike began smoothly. The children walked in pairs, some skipping ahead and some dragging behind, but always within sight. The forest was alive with birdsong and the crunch of boots on dry leaves. Every so often, Mr. Dalton stopped to point out animal tracks or the marks of an old logging road that had been swallowed by nature. The children listened with curiosity, scribbling notes in their little journals, their voices full of wonder. By noon, the group reached a clearing near a gentle stream. The teachers announced it was time for lunch. Sandwiches and juice boxes were pulled out of backpacks, and the children sat in circles, trading food and telling stories. The sunlight filtered through the branches, painting the ground with shifting patterns. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. After eating, some of the children played near the stream. They threw pebbles into the water, chasing the ripples. Others collected wildflowers, showing them proudly to their friends. A few sat on rocks, sketching or writing in their notebooks. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. But ordinary days can sometimes carry hidden shadows. At around 1 o'clock, Mr. Reynolds clapped his hands and called everyone back. The plan was to follow the trail further up the ridge before looping back down to the bus. 14 children stood, laughing and brushing crumbs off their clothes, ready to continue. They picked up their bags and followed behind the teachers. The line stretched out as the trail narrowed, with the faster children skipping ahead. At first, it was fine. The children were never far apart. But the mountain trails could twist and split. A path that seemed straight could suddenly fork, and one step too far could make someone lose sight of the person ahead. It was Miss Carter who noticed first. She looked back to count heads and realized the last few children weren't visible. She called out their names, her voice carrying through the trees. At first, there was no answer. Then faint laughter drifted from somewhere to the left, as if the children were only a few steps away but out of sight. "Stay where you are," she shouted, but the laughter faded, swallowed by the forest. Mr. Dalton quickly turned the group around. He knew these woods well, and he was not worried yet. Children sometimes strayed a little, but they always came back when called. He walked toward where the voices had been heard. The rest of the class waited, a little uneasy now, shifting from foot to foot. Minutes passed. Then came the first real jolt of fear. Mr. Dalton returned, his face pale, shaking his head. "They're not there," he said. "Not anywhere close." Panic spread quickly. The teachers called the missing names again, louder, their voices echoing off the trees. The other children shouted too, their young voices breaking with worry. But the forest gave no reply. Only the wind moved, whispering through the leaves. Within an hour, the search grew frantic. The teachers split up, circling through nearby paths. The guide pushed deeper, certain he would spot footprints, or at least hear the sound of movement. But the forest seemed to hide everything. There were no broken branches, no scattered belongings, no sign that 14 children had passed that way at all. It was as if the forest had simply closed around them and swallowed them whole. By evening, the situation had turned desperate. The remaining students were rushed back to the bus and driven down to town while the adults stayed behind, still shouting, still searching. The news spread like wildfire through Mill Creek. Parents dropped everything and rushed to the mountain, their hearts pounding with fear. Police cars and emergency trucks soon lined the trailhead. Volunteers arrived carrying flashlights and supplies, determined to find the missing children before the night grew too dark. The forest that had seemed so peaceful in the morning now loomed like a living wall, dark and impenetrable. The searchers moved in lines, calling out, shining lights into every shadow. They searched until dawn, but nothing appeared. No cries for help, no footprints, no torn clothing left behind. By sunrise, the truth began to settle in like a heavy stone. 14 children had walked into the forest, and not a single one had walked back out. The parents refused to believe it. They clung to each other, demanding that the search continue. They begged the officers not to stop, not to leave their children behind. Teams of search dogs were brought in, helicopters flew over the mountains, and the trails were scoured again and again. Still, nothing. Not one clear trace. In Mill Creek, classrooms sat empty. The little desks of the missing children were left untouched, books still open, pencils lying where they had been set down. The whole town moved in a haze of disbelief. How could 14 children vanish together in a place so familiar, with teachers and guides nearby? Every parent kept hope alive, but fear hung heavy in the air. It was only the first day, the first chapter of what would become one of the most chilling mysteries the town had ever faced. And though nobody realized it at the time, the answers would not come quickly. They would take years, even decades, before the first clue appeared again. The days after the disappearance were filled with chaos, sorrow, and a kind of confusion that words could hardly describe. For the families of Mill Creek, life stopped the moment the news spread that their children were missing. Parents rushed to the mountain trails, shouting until their voices broke, searching with bare hands, tearing through bushes, turning over rocks, and hoping that any moment their children would come running out, tired but alive. The local authorities quickly built search camps at the base of Pine Ridge Mountain. Tents were raised, food supplies were brought in, and teams of volunteers poured in from nearby towns. The forest was mapped and divided into zones. Every group carried flashlights, whistles, ropes, and radios. They marched into the forest at dawn and returned only when night made it impossible to see. But the more they searched, the more hopeless it began to feel. It was as though the children had vanished into thin air. Helicopters flew overhead for days, scanning the forest with powerful spotlights. Search dogs sniffed through the undergrowth, but they stopped again and again, confused, unable to follow any clear scent. Divers even checked nearby rivers and lakes, but found nothing. The trail that should have been alive with 14 sets of footsteps was strangely clean, untouched, as though no one had passed through at all. Every evening, families gathered at the base camp, clinging to each other, listening to the officers deliver their reports. Each time, the words were the same: no sign. We will continue. Mothers wept quietly, while fathers paced in frustration. Some refused to leave the mountain at night, sitting by campfires with eyes fixed on the darkness, whispering their children's names over and over as if somehow, the forest might return them. Days stretched into weeks. News reporters arrived with cameras, broadcasting the tragedy to the world. The story of the missing 14 children spread across the country and beyond. Strangers who had never even heard of Mill Creek sent letters of support, while others offered theories about what had happened. Some believed the children had simply gotten lost and wandered too far. Others suspected foul play, though no evidence pointed to kidnappers. There were even whispers of stranger explanations: hidden caves, abandoned tunnels, or forces nobody could quite understand. The families ignored the whispers. They wanted only one thing: to see their children again. The town of Mill Creek became a place frozen in grief. Streets grew quiet. Playgrounds were empty. School halls echoed with silence where the laughter of 14 children had once filled the air. Teachers found it painful to even walk into classrooms, for every corner reminded them of the ones who were missing. Desks sat untouched, with notebooks and pencils left exactly as they had been on that spring morning. The missing children's photographs were pinned everywhere: on store walls, at the gas station, on telephone poles. Smiling faces looked out from those photos, reminders of the lives that had been full of hope and dreams. Under each picture were names: Hannah, David, Lily, Mark, and 10 others. The whole town carried those names in their hearts like heavy stones. Despite all efforts, summer came and went with no answers. The search teams grew smaller as weeks dragged into months. Officials said they had searched every inch of the mountain, every cave, every path, but still no sign. Slowly, the official presence thinned. Trucks were packed, tents were taken down, and many outsiders left. For the authorities, it was becoming an unsolvable case. But for the parents, hope still burned, even if faintly. They refused to give up. Many of them returned to the mountain year after year, hiking the same trails, leaving food or clothing behind in case their children might somehow still be alive. They lit candles by the trailhead, prayed, and whispered promises into the wind: we will never stop looking for you. The forest, however, kept its silence. Time is a strange thing when grief takes hold. 1 year passed, then 2. Birthdays came and went. Christmas mornings were quiet, with presents left unopened under trees. Chairs at family tables sat empty. Parents lived with a painful mixture of hope and despair: hope that their children might return one day, and despair that every day without them was another reminder of loss. Some families broke under the weight of it. Marriages crumbled, friendships strained. People who had once been strong community members withdrew into their homes, unable to face the world. Others channeled their grief into action, forming groups to keep the memory of the missing children alive. They organized vigils, spoke on television, and kept pushing the authorities to reopen searches, even when years had already passed. By the 10th year, in 2017, the case had become one of the country's most haunting mysteries. Books were written about it, and documentaries aired late at night, each offering theories but no solid answers. For outsiders, the story became a puzzle. But for Mill Creek, it was no puzzle at all: it was an open wound that had never healed. Some townspeople claimed to have seen strange things on the mountain: unexplained lights, voices carried by the wind, shadows that seemed too large to belong to animals. Others dismissed these stories as grief-fed imagination. Yet even the most practical people admitted that there was something unsettling about how 14 children could vanish all at once, without leaving a single clue. By 2025, 18 years had passed since that spring morning. The missing children, if alive, would now be adults in their 30s. For their families, that thought was both comforting and heartbreaking. They imagined what their sons and daughters might look like now, how tall they might be, what careers they might have chosen, what families they might have started. But those imaginings always ended with the same sharp pain: they were not there. Many parents still kept their children's rooms exactly as they had been in 2007. Posters of cartoon characters still hung on walls, school trophies gathered dust on shelves, and half-finished homework sat in drawers. Some said they could not bring themselves to change anything, because to do so would feel like admitting the children were never coming back. Others visited the trailhead every year on the same date, leaving flowers and photographs. They stood in silence, remembering the last time they saw their children step off that bus, waving and laughing. For them, the mountain was no longer a place of beauty, but a place of unanswered questions. The town itself carried the weight of the mystery in every corner. Visitors sometimes came out of curiosity, asking questions, walking the trails, hoping to feel part of the story. For the locals, it was harder. To them, it was not just a story, it was their lives, their families, their children. What made the pain sharper was the absence of even the smallest clue. Most mysteries leave behind some trace of footprint, a piece of clothing, a broken branch. But Pine Ridge gave nothing back. Searchers had gone over the land dozens of times, but it remained stubbornly silent. That silence haunted everyone. Yet, even in the quiet despair, a stubborn seed of hope refused to die. Parents told themselves, if they vanished so suddenly, maybe they are still alive somewhere. Maybe someone has them. Maybe one day they will find their way back. That hope was fragile, but it was all they had. 18 years is a long time to live with questions that never find answers. Many families had grown older, faces lined with worry and sorrow. Some grandparents had passed away without ever knowing what became of their grandchildren. But those who remained still waited. They waited for a phone call, a letter, a knock on the door, anything that might bring news. Then, in the summer of 2025, something finally stirred. It began quietly, with a group of hikers who had wandered into a part of the forest that was rarely explored. What they found deep in the trees would reignite the mystery of Mill Creek, and change everything the families thought they knew. It was a warm afternoon in July 2025 when 3 hikers set out to explore a section of Pine Ridge Mountain that few people visited. Their names were Daniel, Claire, and Miguel, friends from a nearby town who enjoyed adventure and the quiet of the forest. They had grown up hearing the story of the missing children. To them, the mountain was not just a place for hiking, it was a place filled with mystery, almost like a ghost that lingered over Mill Creek. That day, they decided to follow a trail that had been closed for years. Fallen trees blocked parts of the path, and thick vines covered the stones. Daniel carried a map, though he knew the official maps of the mountain had never been fully accurate. Claire took photos along the way, capturing the beauty of the place, while Miguel walked ahead with a stick, clearing branches out of the way. As the sun dipped lower, they came across something unusual. Hidden behind a curtain of ivy was a narrow opening in the rock face. At first, it looked like a natural cave, but when Miguel pushed the vines aside, they saw something else. The entrance was too straight, too clean. It looked carved by hands, not by nature. Curiosity pulled them closer. The opening was small, just wide enough for a person to crouch and slip through. Daniel shined his flashlight inside and saw a dark tunnel stretching further back. A rush of cool air brushed against their faces. The hikers exchanged uneasy glances. "This isn't on the map," Daniel whispered. They hesitated for a moment, but their sense of discovery was stronger than their fear. They stepped inside. The tunnel smelled damp and earthy, and the sound of dripping water echoed faintly. The walls were rough stone, scratched in places, almost as though someone had once dragged tools across them. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the tunnel was holding on to every sound. After a few minutes of careful walking, Claire noticed something on the ground. She bent down and picked up a small, faded piece of cloth. It looked old and worn, as though it had been there for years. Miguel found a rusted tin lunchbox lying against the wall, covered in dust. When Daniel brushed the dirt away, they all froze. Painted faintly on the side was the name Hannah, one of the children who had disappeared in 2007. The three hikers stared at each other, hearts pounding. This was no ordinary cave. They had stumbled onto something connected to the missing children. They pushed deeper inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Soon, they entered a wider chamber, and what they saw made them tremble. Scattered across the ground were small belongings: school backpacks, torn notebooks, shoes too small for adults. Dust lay over everything, but the items were unmistakably from children. Claire picked up a notebook and flipped through its fragile pages. The handwriting was shaky but clear, written in a child's style. The first page held only one sentence: "We can't find the way back." Her eyes filled with tears as she read. Miguel found another notebook nearby, this one filled with short entries. Some pages spoke of hunger, others of fear, and some of strange lights that flickered outside the tunnel at night. The last pages grew more desperate, with scribbled words that were hard to read, as if the writer's hands had been shaking badly. The three hikers felt a chill run down their spines. The children had been here. They had lived here, at least for some time. Not knowing what else to do, Daniel took photos of everything with his phone. "We need to tell someone," he said, his voice low and urgent. They gathered a few items to bring back as proof: the lunchbox, the notebook, and a shoe, and carefully retraced their steps out of the tunnel. When they emerged into the sunlight again, the world outside seemed brighter and louder than before. None of them spoke much on the way down the mountain. Their thoughts were too heavy, filled with questions they could not answer. That evening, they drove straight to the police station in Mill Creek. The officers at first were skeptical. People had claimed to find clues before, but nothing ever turned out to be real. But when Daniel laid the dusty lunchbox and the notebook on the table, silence filled the room. The names, the handwriting, and the objects were undeniable. This was different. The news spread quickly. Within hours, officials, journalists, and families of the missing children rushed to Pine Ridge. The forest that had been quiet for years now buzzed with activity again. Tents were raised, equipment brought in, and search teams prepared to re-enter the hidden tunnel. For the families, it was an overwhelming moment. Some wept openly, clutching the small belongings of their children as if they were treasures. Others stood in shock, whispering prayers. After 18 long years, they finally had a clue, a real clue, that their children had been alive, at least for some time after they vanished. When investigators returned to the chamber inside the tunnel, they found even more. There were marks on the walls, small carvings made by young hands. Some were names, scratched deep into the stone as if the children wanted the world to know they had been there. Others were simple drawings: stick figures, stars, and animals that carried both innocence and fear. The deeper teams went, the stranger it became. There were narrow passageways leading further underground, twisting and turning in ways that seemed unnatural. Some ended abruptly, while others led to hidden chambers with signs of fire pits, as though someone had tried to keep warm. But what struck investigators most was what they didn't find. There were no bodies. No remains. No clear sign of where the children had gone after leaving their belongings behind. It was as if they had simply moved deeper into the mountain or been taken somewhere else. The discovery lit a fire of questions across the country. Experts debated endlessly on television. How had the children survived at first? Who had carved those tunnels? And most importantly, where had the children gone after leaving behind their things? For the families, the discovery reopened both hope and pain. Some clung to the idea that their children had been alive longer than anyone imagined. Others feared the worst, that the mountain still held secrets too dark to uncover. Even so, one thing was certain: the mystery was no longer frozen in silence. After 18 years, the story of the vanished 14 had stirred again, and the world was watching closely. But this was only the beginning. For inside those tunnels, deeper than the first teams had dared to go, there were signs that something even more unsettling waited in the darkness. Something that would change everything the families thought they knew about that day in 2007. After the initial discovery of the hidden tunnel, Mill Creek was filled with a mixture of hope, fear, and unshakable curiosity. Investigators returned with specialized equipment, high-powered flashlights, cameras, and rope harnesses to explore the deeper parts of the mountain. Teams of archaeologists, historians, and local guides worked together, their faces tense but determined. The world outside waited as if holding its breath. The question everyone wanted answered was simple: what had happened to the 14 children? As the teams went further into the dark, twisting tunnels, the air grew colder, damp, and heavy. Every sound echoed strangely, making the explorers feel as though the mountain itself were watching them. The first chamber had already yielded small belongings, but deeper inside, the tunnels became more complex. There were branching passages, some wide enough to walk comfortably, others barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. The walls were marked with strange scratches, as if someone had tried to communicate or leave a message. It was in one of these deeper chambers that they found something extraordinary. Small beds had been crafted out of sticks and leaves, carefully arranged in corners. Nearby, small fire pits had been constructed, though the ashes were old and cold. The investigators realized that the children must have survived in these hidden rooms for some time, creating small spaces for warmth and rest. For the families, this was both comforting and heartbreaking. They had been alive, but trapped and alone. Among the scattered belongings, more notebooks and journals were discovered. Unlike the first ones found by the hikers, these were filled with longer entries. The handwriting was careful at first, neat like any schoolwork, but grew more erratic as time went on. The entries spoke of fear, confusion, and the struggle to find a way out. There were also hints of teamwork. The children had organized themselves, taking turns gathering food, looking for water, and keeping watch over each other. The investigators read aloud snippets from the journals, and even hardened experts were struck by the raw honesty of the children's words. Some passages were chilling. The children described strange lights in the forest outside, sometimes dancing across the tunnel entrances. They wrote of sounds that could not be explained: voices, footsteps, and whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. At first, the teams tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the children were scared, and the natural echoes of the mountain had played tricks on their minds. But the descriptions were too consistent, too detailed to ignore. In another chamber, they found carvings on the walls, not just names or drawings, but symbols arranged in patterns. Experts who examined them suggested they were simple codes, possibly a way for the children to communicate or leave messages for anyone who might find them. Some of the symbols repeated across multiple chambers, suggesting that the children had spent a long time marking their paths and keeping track of each other's movements. Despite all these discoveries, there was a growing question that haunted everyone: if the children had survived, where were they now? The tunnels led further down into darkness, but they eventually reached dead ends or collapsed walls. There was no evidence of exits large enough for the children to have left. It was as if the mountain had held them prisoner, then allowed them to vanish once more. The investigators also noticed something strange about the layout. Certain areas seemed deliberately hidden, almost like someone had planned them to be difficult to find. There were narrow, twisting corridors and false chambers, making it nearly impossible for anyone unfamiliar with the paths to navigate. How had 14 children discovered and survived in such a complex underground space? It was a question that baffled even the most experienced guides. Outside, the families waited anxiously at the base camp. Every time a team returned, they brought news, photos, or small belongings of the children. Parents clutched each object as if it were a lifeline. Tears flowed freely, hugs were long and desperate, and yet there was also a flicker of hope that their children might still be alive, somewhere beyond the mountains. Every photograph of a journal page or a drawing became a symbol of survival and resilience. The media had arrived too, and the world watched. News channels broadcast images of the tunnels, of the journals, and of the careful arrangements the children had made. Experts debated on camera, speculating about what had happened. Some suggested that the children had been guided by someone kind, someone who had hidden them from the outside world for reasons unknown. Others feared a darker explanation, though there was no proof of human interference beyond the carvings and the crafted spaces. Meanwhile, the journals continued to reveal secrets. Some entries spoke of hope of making plans to escape, of imagining returning home, and of encouraging each other to stay brave. Others described days of frustration, hunger, and fear of never being found. The investigators noted the maturity in the children's words. Though young, they had displayed remarkable courage, teamwork, and intelligence in a situation that no one should ever face. The deeper the teams explored, the more it became clear that the children had adapted to their circumstances. They had created routines, gathering water from small underground streams, rationing food they could find, and marking safe spots in the tunnels. They had learned to navigate the labyrinthine passages and even left messages for each other in case someone became separated. It was survival at the highest level, born out of necessity, and it spoke volumes about the strength of human spirit. Yet, despite all these signs of survival, there was also a mystery that refused to be solved. The final chambers led to walls that seemed natural, but closer inspection revealed subtle tool marks. Whoever or whatever had constructed these tunnels had gone to great lengths to hide the exits. No traces of movement beyond the mountain were found. The children had left belongings, but they themselves were gone. How could they have vanished from a place so isolated, so carefully constructed? Psychologists and child behavior experts were brought in to examine the journals and carvings. They were astonished by the children's mental resilience. The entries showed fear, certainly, but also creativity, cooperation, and hope. The children had comforted each other through art, writing, and small rituals. They had tried to maintain a sense of normalcy despite the terrifying circumstances. For the families, reading these details was both a source of pride and an ache they could never fully describe. By the end of the investigation, the chambers were documented in full detail. Every journal, every carving, and every object was catalogued. Photographs were taken, sketches drawn, and reports written. Yet, the biggest questions remained: where had the children gone? Who had helped or hindered them? And what really lay beyond the deepest tunnels of Pine Ridge? The discovery changed everything. For years, the missing children had been assumed lost forever, their fate unknown. Now, after 18 years, the evidence showed they had survived in the tunnels for a time, coping with fear, hunger, and uncertainty. But the story was far from complete. The mystery was not solved, it had only deepened, pointing to secrets that the mountain had kept for nearly 2 decades. For the families, the emotional impact was profound. They finally had proof that their children had fought to survive, leaving behind traces of their courage, creativity, and determination. At the same time, the absence of their children was a constant reminder of the unknown forces at work. Some parents held tightly to hope that one day they might be reunited, while others faced the painful reality that 18 years could have changed everything. Outside the mountain, news outlets, historians, and experts debated what the tunnels meant. Theories ranged from natural phenomena to hidden shelters, from secret underground networks to something beyond understanding. But everyone agreed on one thing: the children had shown extraordinary resilience and intelligence, surviving in conditions no one expected them to endure. And so, the story of the 14 children continued, growing richer and stranger with every discovery. The tunnels, the journals, the carvings, and the carefully constructed chambers painted a picture of courage and mystery intertwined. It was a story of survival, yes, but also of questions that could not yet be answered. The world watched, the families waited, and Pine Ridge Mountain kept its secrets a little longer, hiding the final chapters of the children's journey. After the discoveries inside Pine Ridge Mountain, the small town of Mill Creek was buzzing with renewed energy, fear, and hope. Families gathered at the base of the mountain, clutching the belongings of their missing children and reading journal entries aloud. Every photograph, every shoe, every notebook became a symbol of life, survival, and mystery. For 18 years, they had lived with uncertainty. Now, at last, they had proof that the children had endured. Authorities, investigators, and experts continued exploring the deeper chambers of the mountain. They brought in advanced equipment, thermal cameras, ground-penetrating radar, and portable lights to examine areas that had been too dangerous or complex for the first teams. While the evidence confirmed that the children had adapted, lived, and survived underground for a time, there was still no clue about how they had vanished from the mountain afterward. It was as if the forest and stone had held them, and then released them without a trace. The families were allowed inside the camp near the discovery site under strict supervision. They walked along the tunnels carefully, touching the walls and picking up small items. Mothers ran their fingers along carved names. Fathers traced patterns scratched into the stone. Each step brought memories flooding back, images of a child running along the trail, laughing with friends, waving goodbye in the morning. They cried, sometimes silently, sometimes loudly, but through their tears, a sense of connection returned. Even after all those years, the children had left a mark, a way for their families to reach them emotionally. Psychologists who examined the journals noted the extraordinary resilience of the children. Their words revealed courage, creativity, and determination to survive in unimaginable circumstances. They had crafted shelters, collected water, kept watch over one another, and even tried to make the tunnels a safe space. Every entry, every drawing, every scratch told a story of hope. It was as though the children had refused to give in to fear, leaving messages for anyone who might find them. But the mystery of their disappearance after leaving these underground chambers remained unsolved. Authorities considered every possibility. Some speculated the children had found a hidden exit unknown to anyone else. Others thought someone or some group had guided them away for reasons that could never be proven. The tunnels offered survival, yes, but no exit that explained the vanishing. The more the investigators examined, the more questions they had. Despite the unanswered questions, the discovery brought families a measure of closure. For the first time in 18 years, they knew their children had fought to survive. That knowledge, as painful as it was, allowed them to begin the slow process of healing. They told stories to the younger generations, preserving the courage and strength of the children's journey. It became a lesson in resilience, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The town of Mill Creek changed as well. The forest, once a place of fear and sorrow, became a site of respect, curiosity, and quiet reverence. Some visitors came to learn about the children's survival, leaving flowers at the trailhead, taking photographs respectfully, or sitting silently in the tunnels. The story spread across the country and even internationally. Experts, historians, and journalists debated and discussed, all fascinated by the courage of 14 children surviving underground for weeks, maybe months. Among the most emotional moments were when parents returned to the site alone. They walked through the tunnels, carried the journals, and whispered messages as if speaking directly to their children. Some read aloud from the entries, words that had once been private now shared publicly, giving them a sense of connection that had been missing for nearly 2 decades. Even if their children were never found alive, the children's voices echoed through the stone. They were no longer completely lost, they had left themselves behind in a way that could be touched, read, and remembered. The media coverage continued for months. Documentaries aired, journalists visited, and interviews with experts explained what the children had endured. Everyone agreed it was an extraordinary story of resilience and survival, unlike any other in recent history. Psychologists praised the children's ingenuity, historians marveled at the hidden chambers, and families everywhere were moved by the depth of courage displayed by young minds facing fear and uncertainty. Even the scientific community was fascinated. Ground-penetrating radar and advanced mapping techniques were used to study the tunnels further. They confirmed that the underground passages were more complex than initially believed, with hidden areas that might never be fully explored safely. This discovery fascinated researchers who studied survival, child psychology, and natural structures, proving that the mountain held secrets that combined human resilience and geological mystery. Despite these advances, the ultimate question remained: where did the children go after leaving their underground shelters? Some families imagined them living far away, grown up, and unaware of the world that had searched for them. Others wondered if a natural event or mysterious circumstance had carried them out of the forest. There were no bodies, no final evidence, only clues that they had survived for some time in a hidden, underground world. That uncertainty, though frustrating, became part of the story itself. Over time, the children's story became a symbol in Mill Creek. Schools taught lessons about courage, teamwork, and hope. Inspired by the journals discovered in the tunnels, townspeople shared the story with visitors, not as a tale of fear, but as a story of determination and survival. Even adults who had once been broken by grief found ways to use the story to inspire others. It became a quiet testament to the human spirit, showing how strength, courage, and hope can endure even in the darkest of circumstances. The families continued their lives with the knowledge that their children had fought, survived, and left behind proof of their resilience. For parents, every small object, the worn shoes, the notebooks, the carved names, became precious relics, reminders of the love and courage of their children. They organized small museums and displays in the town hall, carefully preserving each item for future generations. Visitors from all over the world came to see these artifacts, learning about the mysterious story that had haunted Mill Creek for 18 years. Yet, the lingering mystery could not be fully resolved. The mountain had given some answers but kept others hidden. Where had the children gone after leaving the underground chambers? How had they survived in the world beyond? No one knew. And maybe, part of the story's power was in that very mystery, the reminder that life sometimes leaves questions unanswered, and courage can shine brightest in the face of uncertainty. In the end, the 14 children of Mill Creek became more than just a missing group, they became symbols of resilience and hope. Families, townspeople, and even strangers felt their presence through the belongings, the journals, and the carvings. Though the mystery of their ultimate fate remained, the story inspired everyone who learned about it to value courage, ingenuity, and the bonds of family above all else. For the families, the 18 years of waiting were still painful, but the discovery offered comfort. Their children had survived for a time, had endured fear, and had left behind a message for the world: even in the darkest circumstances, hope and determination could endure. The story of Pine Ridge Mountain, the hidden tunnels, and the 14 children would never be forgotten. It was a tale that reminded everyone that human spirit is unbreakable, and sometimes, even in mystery, the truth of courage shines brightest. And so, Mill Creek returned to life, carrying forward a story of loss, survival, and the extraordinary resilience of 14 children who vanished in 2007. They had changed the town, the people, and even the world's understanding of courage and hope. Though the final chapter of their story remained unwritten, the legacy of their survival, intelligence, and determination lived on, inspiring generations to come.